Hello everybody and welcome to the Disruptive Innovation Festival. The DIF is the online festival of ideas that asks the question, what if we could redesign everything? Now today, which is one of the first sessions of DIF 2017, we'll be tackling one of three main themes of the DIF this year, the age of automation. In this session is called Utopia versus Dystopia, Driverless Futures and the Impact of Autonomy of City Life. And in a moment, I'll pass things over to Dan Phillips and Samuel Johnson, live from the Royal College of Arts. But before I do, I just want to remind you all that this is an interactive session, and we really want you to post your comments and questions in the chat function just below this session page. And you can also put your comments and questions and feed them to Sam and Dan by using the hashtag ThinkDiff. So, without any further ado, Sam, Dan, thank you very much for joining us. Over to you.
Hi everyone, my name is Dan Phillips. I'm project manager on a large driverless vehicle project called Gateway. And I'm also a researcher and a tutor at the Royal College of Arts. And I have with me Sam Johnson.
Hello, yeah, my name is Sam Johnson. I am a project researcher for the Helen Hanlon Centre for Design, and I have a background in automotive design. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to take you through some of the work that we've done as part of the Gateway project, and I'm going to put up some slides in a moment to help us through the session. Please do make any notes and comments that you have, and we'll try to bring those up at some stage. So basically what we're going to try and do is talk about utopia and dystopia in regards to this driverless vehicles. And then we're going to open it up to some questions. After that, we're going to look at some of the issues that we think autonomy has to face when we think about the circular economy. And then at the end of the session, we'll have another Q&A to round off our session. So here we go, onto the slides. Okay, so driverless futures, utopia or dystopia? Let's go. So this image shows a future London where driverless vehicles have changed the city and how we live in it. Drones crisscross the sky. Delivery pods clamber up the sides of tall buildings. Robots queue for jobs at the Robot Job Centre. And single-person pods transport sleeping passengers in herds from home to office and back again. In this presentation, we'll share with you some predictions on the shape and variety of future driverless vehicles, the hopes and fears of Londoners that we spoke to in workshops and exhibitions, and the design opportunities and challenges that we must consider if we are to create cities and mobility solutions that meet the needs and aspirations of city dwellers in the future. We'll also consider how these opportunities and challenges affect the circular economy, and open up to further conversations. First, what are the issues that we need to consider when designing future vehicles? These diagrams show the themes that we used to inspire a group of vehicle design interns last summer. We asked them to consider what vehicles would look like if they were designed for children, and if they were designed to support those with additional needs. What impact will driverless vehicles have on city architecture and on public services like health and security? How will future vehicles deliver food and other goods? And how will they communicate with each other and the world around them? Vehicles included city pods that herd together on larger roads and split up into individual units for the last mile. Connected cars that provide additional services beyond transportation. Gesture vehicles that nod, wink, and purr to signify what they're planning to do. Cars specifically designed for families so that they can play or chat together on the move.
extended mobility vehicles that make it easy for wheelchair users to get in and get out of. Further solutions look at the underlying needs and desires of Londoners and the implications of changing safety requirements in vehicles. Some vehicles support millennial activities like immersive 3D virtual gaming and concerns around physical fitness, a treadmill car or a bus that contains gym equipment. Another example on this page considers what couples will do in a taxi when there is no driver to watch over them. Beyond vehicles for people, students imagined new ways of enabling city life with a range of useful and not so useful services, from automated street cleaning and autonomous dog walking to on-street vending and mobile market stalls that can run without an operator. They imagined bins that go to the depot to be emptied, mobile noise deadening machines that absorb construction noise, and mobile barriers that herd people across busy junctions to ensure that VIP driverless vehicles get priority. Delivery pods collect content from motherships that in turn collect parcels from central depots. City skies are filled with various drones. Bee-bots pollinate trees and plants. Adverts are beamed down on passers-by based on their online profiles and neighborhood they're walking through. And drones are put to use by security and health services too. Our vehicle design students created even wilder suggestions based on the assumption that future vehicles and streets would be intrinsically safe and accident-free. These included climbing frames that kids can ride on the way to school, recycling trucks that automatically sort and prepare waste for reuse as they collect it, and vehicles that support learning outside the classroom or provide shared workspaces for use on your commute across town. Beyond the work carried out by our designers, we spent time with the public to better understand their hopes and fears for future vehicles and cities. We did this through public workshops where a variety of people worked in teams to share their attitudes to autonomy, mapped out current and future journeys and experiences, and then designed their dream vehicle using Lego, plasticine, and their inner child. In all, we met over 100 people, including technology enthusiasts, drivers, non-drivers, and people with additional needs. We also delivered a 6-week exhibition at the London Transport Museum, where we ran workshops covering a variety of topics and taking a holistic approach to the future of driverless technologies. In entertaining interiors, we explored how the inside of vehicles might change as entertainment and play became as important as driving and safety. In What Can Be Made Driverless, we invited visitors to imagine a future of autonomous delivery pods, waste recyclers, advertisements, and showers. In Cars for Kids, we considered what these driverless vehicles might look like, and if parents would feel comfortable allowing their children to use them alone. And during the autonomous architecture workshop, we worked with architects, urban planners, and the public to imagine how the architecture of the city might respond to these new vehicles. And finally, we have just run a series of in-vehicle workshops where we prototyped future commuting, shopping, and leisure journeys in our driverless shuttle called Harry on a public trial on the Greenwich Peninsula in London. A future commute where you work on your tablet, do some exercise, or meditate after a busy day. A future shopping trip where you write out a shopping list, wrap up a present, and have a massage. And a trip to a party where you eat some snacks, play a game, and dress up for a fun night out. We learned some of the things that people worry about, like antisocial behavior in a driverless city, the role of big business in controlling and monitoring our movement, deserted high streets as just-in-time delivery makes shops even less profitable, and the threat that a city full of automated machines might make our lives more isolated, robotic, and inhuman. About some of the people's hopes, including a city environment that is quiet, clean, and pollution-free. Streets that are designed for people, not machines. More comfortable, fun, and useful commutes and journeys. No need to park, refuel, or drive a car to the garage. And take on your travels or rent out as a mobile Airbnb. safer streets for pets and for people, and driverless vehicles for all. So our designers brought these hopes and fears to life through a series of provocative images that challenge us to consider the implications of new technology on our lives. Will these new technologies focus on the needs and desires of the wealthiest in society and exclude those with financial resources? Here, a row of surf robots carry a wealthy couple while a robot arm feeds them grapes from a bowl. Will autonomous machines, like other technologies, remove even more jobs from the labour market? Here, street vending machines ply their trade and track their customers using sophisticated machine learning that knows where and when they are likely to make the most profit. Will people reject shared public transport and demand individual pods that carry them from door to door without human intervention, making our cities even more isolated and potentially leading to even higher levels of obesity and diabetes? And while shops are closed and replaced by just-in-time delivery systems, will the wealthy elite be shuttled to work in luxury autonomous coaches that double as high-end retail outlets? Will robot machines resort to aggressive behavior as they hustle with pedestrians for the fastest route across town? How will intelligent machines communicate with distracted people? As one of our participants said, I can't make eye contact with a robot. I can't give them a nod or a wink. And what are the opportunities that come from a driverless future? We imagine how citizens can reclaim their roads and live in harmony with future robots. Here, a guidebot helps a blind person navigate, while also providing a guided tour of local history. Street cleaners pick up crisp packets and return them to the mobile bin, which is also displaying local news. A delivery pod tracks down the owner of a gift that's been sent by her mum. More and more vehicles are kitted out with additional services so they can support other functions when they are not needed by their owners. Here, a doctor's car pulls over to help a person who has fallen unconscious. What are the other services that future vehicles might provide? As we live longer and more retirees decide to downsize to the centre of town, shared vehicles will need to become more inclusive and easy to access. A future driverless taxi may include a ramp to help everyone from mums with parent prams to those in wheelchairs, a basket for your pet, and even an internal loo if you are caught short. Noise from drilling could be reduced to a more acceptable level, allowing conversations without the need to shout. If we aren't paying for drivers to move machines around, what other functions could these mobile robots provide to support the daily life of our cities? And while some are concerned by the lack of a driver, others see the possibility of more benign behavior on our roads. Driverless vehicles can be designed to be polite and patient, especially if their passengers are comfortable and enjoying the ride. And perhaps shops won't close, they'll reinvent themselves. Cities will become densely occupied with pedestrianised streets, and those who do need to take a bus will be able to sit at a bar and drink a coffee as fleets of intelligent vehicles navigate calmly across our towns. People hope for myriad things, and maybe the future will provide them all. These gentle giants flap through the sky, picking up energy from wind and sun, and use this to clean the air or take future tourists on panoramic trips above the Thames. So, will the future be a dystopian one, where jobs are lost, high streets closed, and machines track our every move? Or can we create a positive future where autonomous machines increase access for all, drive productive well-being in our society, improve our environment, and, as the American poet and writer Richard Brautigan hoped 50 years ago, watch over us with loving grace? So that's the initial part of our presentation, and I think I'd like to open it up to people to ask some questions, if you've got any. And if not, me and Sam will have a conversation about this.
Sounds good to me.
So any questions?
Cool. Well, I've got a question. In terms of the, I guess, ownership aspect of autonomy and its impact on the circular economy, it kind of seems like there's maybe two routes of which effectively vehicles could travel in. Either vehicles that have multiple functions and do multiple things throughout their day to make the best use of their time, or you have very specialized specific vehicles that perform one task very well. Any thoughts on maybe the direction of travel and which one is maybe more advantageous, or which direction would be more appropriate?
Yeah. So, I mean, what we've got at the moment is we've got a lot of vehicles that are sort of quite generalized in their function. So what you've got is you've got people owning a 6-person car because occasionally they need to take everybody on a journey together, or they need a bit more space. So one of the things that we feel is quite possible is that autonomous vehicles will be designed to not be generalized, but be more specific and be used more intensively because they actually perform a better function, these general purpose vehicles that we have at the moment. And I think that could lead to quite interesting diversity of vehicle types. And I think it points the way to people actually choosing to share these vehicles rather than to own them individually.
Interesting. There's one really nice concept that one of the students came up with, which was effectively looking at different ways in which autonomous vehicles could support our public services network. And he was suggesting, let's say, an ambulance needed to get through a set of traffic. Actually, the vehicles on the street could not only get out of the way ahead of time to allow an easier route, whether the ambulance was driven by a person or driven by an autonomous vehicle, but they could actually also maybe get to the scene ahead of time and actually have maybe some sort of onboard basic medical equipment that someone on the scene could then utilize or use to help potentially save someone's life whilst the actual ambulance is on the way. And I think it's quite interesting about how basically normal vehicles, even if they are effectively a normal commuting vehicle, they can have extended roles that can help or benefit the way that the city moves, the way that our society functions, and effectively assist our public services.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the studies that have been done have shown that, we could deliver all the mobility that we currently have in cities with 10% of the number of vehicles. And if you do use vehicles more intensively and they cover more functions, then I think you can end up with quite a different urban environment. I mean, a non-urban example I think is quite interesting is if you go to remote rural communities, the local post bus will also be the local taxi, will also be a place where people sort of meet together on their routes to a local village. And I think that combination of uses, that more intense use of vehicles, it can be really powerful. So I think we're still in this situation where the dominant mindset is towards ownership of your mobility, whereas in many cities around the world we're seeing a change. I mean, in London we've got fewer and fewer people buying vehicles because it's becoming less and less attractive to own them in a city environment. And public transport is also getting a bit better. And when we talk about autonomy, we're not just talking about autonomous private vehicles, we're also talking about autonomous public vehicles. And they could deliver even greater social goods and environmental goods.
Yeah, actually, I think the thing which is really exciting actually with the advent of autonomy, which is maybe between sort of 20 or so years away when it comes into full effect, but actually public services have an incredible opportunity to really harness this ahead of the private sector and particularly rejuvenate the way that the city operates, particularly a city like London, which has exceptionally old infrastructure, and we effectively can't tear down houses and remodel the city. So actually we have to find a far more efficient use of the space that we have, and that goes through the way that the streets are used in terms of movement of traffic. It certainly affects the way the vehicles are parked, which I think is probably a good point to talk about next. And with this reduction that you're saying, actually you're suggesting that around 10% of the vehicles could do the job for the city. It's a ridiculous saving, and that kind of sits alongside the number where sort of, I think in London it's 96% of cars, sorry, 96% of the time cars are parked, which frees up a huge amount of retail space. And then looks at the way that we can then redesign our streets for, well, the best use of public mobility, public social interaction. There's a whole range of things that we can then reapply that space for.
So there are a couple of questions that have come up. One is around timeframes. So we think timeframes will depend on the city rather than on the technology. I think the technology is going to advance more quickly than people realise. You know, when you look at the rapid development of artificial intelligence and the capacity for computers to deliver more and more power, you know, intelligence for less and less energy, I think that the technology is going to move forward to the point where, you know, we'll have, you know, prototypical trialing fully autonomous vehicles in city environments in 5 years' time or less. Now, it takes a longer time for people and for cities and communities to adapt to this new way of thinking, a new way of being. And it's going to have a huge impact on so many sections of society and obviously huge impacts on the automotive industry. But we've sort of set a preferable future in 2035. So we think that's the earliest time for cities like London to really embrace autonomous vehicles as the major mode of transport. And when we talk about autonomous vehicles, we're talking about vehicles that don't have a steering wheel. We think by 2035, all vehicles on the road will be able to go into autonomous mode. So that's one issue. Another question that's been brought up is around who's going to benefit from autonomy first? You know, is it going to be wealthier people, or is it going to be poorer sections of society? I think that comes down to how public services embrace the technology, because the poorest people in society are the major users of public transport at the moment. Although in the best societies, everybody uses public transport because it's actually designed for everyone.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that the reality is that if it is left to commercial companies to introduce autonomous technology, I mean, there will ultimately be a trickle-down effect, but it will always be accessed by the wealthiest first. If public services at the government take a more forward role in it and actively try to integrate it into the transportation networks like that one we have here in London, then there's a far quicker response and integration into actually benefiting people who probably could need it most. Not suggesting that people who have more money don't need it more, but certainly the people who have mobility issues are often stuck using public transportation networks that are not fit for purpose.
Yeah. Another question has come up around these autonomous vehicles and whether they can fit outside of the urban environment. Well, without a doubt, they can add value to rural communities. We haven't spent a huge amount of time researching that area. We've been quite focused on urban environments. But there's no reason why autonomous vehicles can't improve the lives of people in rural environments. We can imagine, as I said, there was the Swiss Post Bus or the Scottish Post Bus. That could be helping, you know, if it's an autonomous vehicle, it could be delivering a lot more services and mobility to more people more effectively in a dispersed environment. Obviously, the challenge in a rural environment is the distances that vehicles have to travel, the diffuseness of populations, those things may make the service less valuable on a person per person basis in terms of the monetary value, but actually probably more valuable for the person if they could afford that additional cost.
I think we've got another question coming. What is the implications in developing countries where the traffic conditions are not so forgiving? I don't know if that means in terms of road conditions or in terms of the way the vehicle traffic moves.
Well, there's an interesting, actually a very interesting video that's worth watching of vehicles traveling in a circle in a car park. And normally, if it's all driven vehicles, they constantly brake and speed up to manage the distance between each other. When you just put one driverless vehicle into the mix, and it just drives much more smoothly, and everybody ends up driving smoothly because you've just added one vehicle to 10 vehicles. So it's an interesting question around the implications in a chaotic road system. I think that there is a possibility to introduce autonomy into the developing world and add value. It will really depend on, again, on public services and cities deciding that they want to speed the development of those vehicles. But also, there's huge issues with upgrading vehicles and the fact that it costs a lot of money to replace one set of vehicles with another. So there might become a thriving trade, or in some sort of hacking technologies that you can add to existing vehicles to make them autonomous. And if we could hack vehicles to make them autonomous, but also hack them to ensure that they were driven by electricity rather than driven by fossil fuels, then I think we can see quite a revolution in not just the efficiency of mobility in developing countries, but also its impact on people's health and well-being and on planetary health and well-being.
I think for me there's a potential another angle on this as well, which is the different, I guess, character that different locations on the planet will have in terms of their driving styles and patterns, and actually the way that people respond to driving, I don't know, inside a city to outside a city. People will drive very differently from, let's say, a city in the States with a grid system. The way people will interact with the road network and others around them is also very different to, let's say, some traffic in Mumbai or somewhere in Asia. Yeah, I think there's. But I think the thing which is really interesting is the type or the way that the machine learning is happening. Once one autonomous vehicle has experienced a scenario, it can actually share that experience with others. So actually, instead of whereas you have your own personal experience through driving, you might learn through experience, but actually once effectively one of the collective has learned, then actually all of them will know. Which kind of leads back to one of Dan's original statements, which actually the acceleration of the development of particularly the AI within autonomous vehicles is going to happen very quickly. And that's because it's expanding exponentially with the sort of shared data that goes across it. But yeah, I tend to agree with him. Like, I think it could have a huge impact on developing countries, and particularly as often in developing countries, the infrastructure isn't there. So actually you can skip out stages that a more developed world has built. I think a really good example of this in Africa is mobile phones coming in after, or skipping out actual telephone exchanges, and mobile phones are taking over instead. So I think that's a really good example.
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting to think of autonomous vehicles as a network rather than a individual items. They are a network in reality, and they can be managed as a network. And the really interesting thing, who's managing that network and for what purpose? Is it being managed to maximize the sale of goods, or is it being managed to maximize the well-being of citizens? And that comes down to a huge ethical question around our democratic processes and the relationship between the economy and politics. So there's another question that's come up around impediments that will make the development of autonomous vehicles more problematic. I think that the biggest issue for people is around safety to start with. So we really have to think through all of the safety scenarios that we have to consider. And, you know, our response to that is that we want to show that autonomous vehicles are the most professional drivers on the road, that they actually shouldn't be allowed on the road until they have a driving license that shows that they are advanced drivers. And so one of our ideas is that, you know, before an autonomous driving technology can go on a road, it has to pass a driving test. And it has to pass the driving test with an instructor in the seat, checking on its behavior, because we think that that's the closest you can get to real world conditions. And, you know, I think that that can be a quite interesting relationship. How do we make sure that driverless vehicles can communicate with people in a meaningful way? So that's one issue.
Okay, yeah, for me, I think that driving test idea kind of links to the whole trust issue, and the numbers suggest that at some point autonomous vehicles, once the technology is matured, will become better drivers than people. And that's not to suggest that accidents will be a complete thing of the past, because there are always going to be outside factors. But at some point, statistically, there will be less accidents, less injuries, and less deaths as a result of autonomy. I guess the problem is, maybe not the problem, but that transition stage of actually teaching people or re-educating people how to interact, engage, and trust these vehicles, because actually it's quite disconcerting to potentially be in a vehicle that has no steering wheel, no controls. You can't stop it necessarily. You have to trust a machine on your personal mobility.
Yeah.
And a whole series of effectively engagement packages, like the one Dan is suggesting, effectively need to be developed to introduce autonomy to people. Yeah.
So trust and safety are big issues. Now we're going to go back to our slideshow and just take you through a few thoughts around the circular economy, and then open it up to questions at the end again. So let me try and organize that. All right. Okay. So when we think about the circular economy and autonomy, these are some of the issues that we think are worth considering. So one is around sharing vehicles and infrastructure. If you imagine that a vehicle can come to you to pick you up, rather than you having to go to the vehicle, you can see that actually people will choose to use a shared autonomous vehicle rather than an individually owned vehicle, because those vehicles can deliver excellent service. We're already seeing how more and more people are using shared vehicles through taxis. So if you imagine those shared vehicles being small community buses that can actually, you know, on the fly create efficient journeys for people in the local community, that could be very powerful. And then if you then think about the infrastructure that supports that smaller fleet, that infrastructure can be compressed into a single space. So effectively, rather than having a charging device outside of every home or outside of every building, you can just focus your charging devices into community garages or community parking areas, which can deliver, you know, the infrastructure even more effectively. And then, you know, going beyond that, we can see a lot of the space that's been taken up by vehicles parked on the sides of roads being given back to people for much more humane activities like play, like conversation, like shopping, like exchange, gardening. All sorts of things happen to our streets when we don't have cars parked on them. So that's really powerful. Another point is around sharing goods and services. Imagine what are the barriers to you sharing your goods at the moment. So you've got too many tomatoes that you've grown in your garden, or you've got a drill that's only being used 5% of the time. Now, you know that there are a lot of people out there who would like to use it, but the barriers for you to deliver those tomatoes or that drill to another person are quite large. You know, you have to either drive to them, or you have to go to the post office. So imagine if you've got you've got robots on the street that can pick up your goods and deliver them to other people in the community. And depending on the pricing structure, you know, you can benefit local communities over global commerce. So that's really quite interesting. And that goes into the intensity of product use, which we can see both in sharing of vehicles, but also in the sharing of the goods, the personal goods that could be used more effectively. We also think that autonomous vehicles can really speed up the adoption of electric technology, because they can drive to a charging point, and actually they work better if they're electrically charged. And most manufacturers who are looking at autonomy are looking at providing electric motors for these vehicles. We think that that can speed up the transformation of our urban mobility from one that's been dominated by fossil fuels to one that's been that's more and more dominated by electricity and by renewable technology. So that's a really powerful thing. These vehicles are also, because they're used more intensively, I mean, this is another argument around the circular economy. Because vehicles and products are used more intensively, they actually come to the end of their life, technically, more quickly. Now, that could be seen as a bad thing, because you're then thinking, well, we're going to have to throw them away more quickly. But actually, it does two things. Firstly, it helps us to focus on how do we design those vehicles so that they're modular, that their components are modular, that can be upgraded as they're on the streets, rather than thrown away and then remanufactured. So there's that sort of upgrade path that comes with the shared economy, I think, which is really interesting. There's also the fact that even if they aren't upgraded and they have to go back into a remanufacturing process, the vehicles that come down the line, instead of coming down the line 10 years down the line, and you've got an old technology, an old inefficient technology on the roads for 10 years, you can have newer technologies on the road in 3 years, as an example. So there's this opportunity to speed up the flow of new technologies into society that should be more efficient and more beneficial. There is, you know, another issue around the dematerializing of services. I'm not sure where autonomy fits in that. I've thought about it, but at the moment I can't see it necessarily dematerializing our city environments, apart from the reduction in number of vehicles on the road. But it may well help us to move from a consumption-based society to an experience and a service-based society. I think we need to do some more work in that area. And then other issues, because I don't think the economy should sit alone. We have to think about the impact of all of these autonomous vehicles on employment, on well-being, on our ecological ecosystems. And at that point, you know, I can see some serious problems that may arise. Firstly, the number of driving jobs, although we have spoken to quite a few taxi drivers who said at the end of the day they don't particularly enjoy driving their taxis, and if they didn't have it as a job, they'd find something else to do, which is sort of interesting, because we have to think about this age of automation and the impact on employment and our sense of purpose, our dignity, and our you know, our ability to provide service to others, which is effectively, you know, what we humans enjoy the most. And then we have to think about well-being, because if door-to-door transportation is so cheap, because you don't have to pay for drivers, because drivers make up 80% of the cost of public services, public transportation or private transportation, maybe, you know, more and more people will choose to jump in a vehicle outside their door and jump out of the vehicle at the other end. And the number of people that will be affected by obesity and by diabetes and other co-related illnesses may increase. So there's an issue around well-being that we need to consider. And then, you know, really the ecological value of our cities. These vehicles don't have any say on the ecology of our cities. We as citizens and our democratic processes need to think about what we do with our cities when they're not dominated by vehicles. You know, what is the future city model when vehicles are just gentle robots moving around, picking people up when needed, and the streets become much, much calmer? What happens? That's really interesting. So, you know, it'd be great to get your thoughts again, and Sam and I can discuss this while we get some questions. So, Sam, what do you think? What are the big issues that you think about when the circular economy comes up in this age of autonomy?
Sure. Yeah, there's a couple of things that I was sort of popped up.
I'll move us back on screen.
Oh, yeah,
sorry, let's do that. Sorry about that. Are we back? Hello. Stop sharing. What am I doing?
That one.
Hello.
There we go.
All right. Can you see us now?
Much better.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole variety of things that I found quite interesting about that. I think with the life cycle thing, I found that quite interesting actually, with effectively the compression of how long vehicles live. But actually, there's another potential benefit for that, because actually, if you have a shorter period of time where the vehicle is running, and you can recycle certain components and parts, as long as that vehicle is effectively recyclable or reusable in some way, or can move on to another purpose to make sure that it keeps on moving around the circular economy, actually you can design very specific vehicles for a specific need and time, which means that you can, in theory, plan stages of development within your infrastructure, design vehicles that specifically meet a need for an express period of time, which is going to be quite short, and then reuse and move on that material.
Yeah.
And design new vehicles for the next stage of that development cycle. Yeah. Which I thought was really interesting, actually. It also kind of raised an idea which is actually something which has been looked at by KPMG, and when they're looking at the future of mobility, they've kind of broken down effectively two different types of, I guess, providers of mobility, and they describe it as grid masters and metalsmiths. And it looks at the idea of grid masters who effectively will look after this sort of service-based economy or experience-based economy from start to finish. So all of your AI interface will be transitioned from your home to your personal device to your vehicle, and then the vehicle will also have to be part of that structure, which might be shared. And actually your applications, your settings, your preferences will effectively uploaded or downloaded onto whichever physical device you have to be using. And then you have effectively the metalsmiths, which I guess would be more like traditional manufacturers or OEMs as we know them today, which are effectively become hardware providers. And I think that's really interesting because there's a big difference in the way that those two will be separated. But yeah, we've got the list that we can reference.
Yeah, yeah, I can drag it up. There you go. I think people can still see us anyway, so there's a list of issues.
I have a question.
Okay, here we come. Yeah.
Is the current legal and legislative infrastructure the main obstacle for autonomous sharing vehicles that adhere to the circular economy?
It could be. I think that, you know, when you, firstly, the legal and legislative infrastructure has dealt with autonomy in other industries. So effectively, when planes fly around, they are being flown autonomously for 99% of the time, and the legal and legislative infrastructure has been built to support planes in the sky. And effectively, the biggest issue around there is risk and insurance. They've already shown, over the last 30, 40 years, a massive reduction in the number of accidents in the aeroplane industry. So I think that there is a reduction in risk, and in terms of insurance associated with it, people have said, well, there are already insurance packages available which they call no-blame insurance. So effectively, we are buying into a different type of legislation. It's not about blaming individuals. It's about looking at the overall risk in society and developing insurance packages that will actually deal with that new type of risk, which is reduced, but can less be pointed. That you can't point at the finger of an individual. So,
yeah, I don't think for me it's not necessarily. I can't see it as being a huge problem. I think once the actual technology is there, it's actually just effectively reorganizing effectively where I guess risk first lies, and then how do you assign responsibility. And it seems, particularly with linking that into a more sharing-based economy, it's more likely to stick with the service providers than it will be with the individuals who are using the transportation, the vehicle, or whatever type it is. In the same way to using an airline, and I think we've already got the airline industry we mentioned before. It's actually probably quite a good model to look at and reference.
Hi, Sam and Dan. Thank you for a great discussion and presentation. Now, I think we've lost you just slightly. I see you've frozen a little bit there, but I think that was the last question that we had on the sessions page. If you have any more questions and comments that you want Dan and Sam to answer, unfortunately, we've run out of time for this session, but I'm sure they can get back to you via the comment section on the session page. But that was a fantastic session, and thanks Dan and Sam for coming along. And sorry that you couldn't stay for the final couple of moments. But you heard it here. Autonomous technologies are the most professional drivers, and the idea of taking into account people and societal fears and needs in imagining and designing autonomous technologies. Is something that was touched upon in the DIF Live launch yesterday with Mark Stevenson, who asserted the point that technology isn't the solution, but the question that helps us answer what type of world that we want to live in. So thanks, Dan and Sam. I see you've just joined us again. Hello.
Yeah, sorry about that. I don't know what happened.
Well, we've got you back now, so we can wrap things up. I think we were towards the end, and that was a fantastic discussion. Thanks, guys, for joining.
Great, thank you very much, and thank you everybody for joining us. And we will have more work. So if you're interested, get in touch.
Absolutely, and so people can get in contact with you directly. But how can people find out more about the work and research that you guys are doing?
Okay, so there are two sources of information. One, come to the RCA's website and look at the Intelligent Mobility program at the RCA. We have 80 students looking at the future of intelligent mobility, and we've got a research centre that's kicking off with new grants from large manufacturers, and also look at the Gateway project. Search Gateway Greenwich and you'll find some really interesting information about that project and the wider consortium that are involved. So those are two sources of information, and we'd be very happy to talk with people about autonomy and the circular economy. So look forward to hearing from you.
Great.
All right. Lovely. Thank you very much, Leo. And thank you, everyone at DIF. And thank you, our audience. All right.
Great. Thanks, Dan. And thanks, Sam, for having this really interesting presentation and discussion today. And the conversation continues on, as we mentioned, on the session page, and you can take the conversation to Dan and Sam. But it wouldn't be the Disruptive Innovation Festival if we didn't have literally hundreds of other sessions going on in the next 3 weeks around automation and future mobility and urban context specifically. We have loads of sessions going on at the DIF throughout the next 3 weeks. I just wanted to highlight a couple that we've got lined up. So we'll actually be hearing from Chris Thorpe from the Royal College of Arts on the 22nd of November at 11 a.m. GMT around future mobility and the circular economy design perspective, and the course that he's doing in the Intelligent Design Institute at RCA. And Dan mentioned today briefly about the electrification of automated urban vehicles. We have a session lined up on the 10th of November, so later this week at 5 p.m. GMT. That's titled "What if we could fuel our sharing economy with hydrogen fuel?" So there's a lot of overlapping themes with a lot of sessions in the DIF. So stay tuned. And thanks again, Dan and Sam, for joining us today. And I'll see you next time at the DIF.